The world of work has been profoundly impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Unions around the world have also been impacted following unprecedented disruption in the year 2020. Many have led workers to the streets to protest against lockdowns, poor pay and worsening working conditions. The latest figures from the International Labour Organization show that 8.8% of global working hours were lost for the whole of last year, and that's equivalent to 255 million full-time jobs. For more on how unions are responding to the impact of COVID-19, I'm joined via Zoom by the General Secretary of IndustriALL Global Union, Valter Sanches. Mr. Sanches, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to the Globe.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
The IndustriALL Global Union has been quoted as having said the pandemic perfectly exposes globalization. But the big question, Valter, is what can we do to influence the flow of money, the flow of power and information?
Well, I think that the pandemic just acted as a catalyst of trends that were going on before pandemic. The growing inequality, companies that are taking advantage of this pandemic to accelerate restructuring that they will do in 5 or 10 years to make redundancies right now. So I think if we see just the 10 richest men in the world, 10 white men, which are the richest one in the world, they increased their fortunes in $500 billion in the period of pandemic. So, and now we see at the same time that we see the administered vaccines, almost 80% of the vaccines administered so far are in only 10 countries. So we have to fight for universal access to vaccines and also for protection of health and safety of the workers, for the ones that are essential workers, for the ones that have to stay away from workplace and they have to have social protection schemes to protect their income and their jobs. And we have to, of course, for the access to address the issue of the recovery, we have to fight for a welfare tax. Some countries like New Zealand, for example, that is one of the cited countries with the best management of the crisis, they implemented a welfare tax. And they were the ones that in last year, they were one of the few countries that experimented the growth of 2.2% of their GDP. So it's the way of addressing the crisis is to make the ones that profit from them to pay more taxes so that we can invest in the stimulus package for recovery.
Now, the union also makes certain averments around further inequalities. It claims that there are more women than men in the dangerous frontline jobs and more people of color. Now, Valter, was there any due diligence taken or is there any data supporting this position?
Look, we have, of course, these parts of the workforce, women, people of color, they were already discriminated even before pandemic. So like I said, pandemic just acted as a catalyst, a fast tracking of all these inequalities in the world. And of course, when we have schemes of people staying at home, you see an increase of domestic violence, and then unions around the world are fighting for the ratification of Convention 190 that addresses violence in the world of work. But fighting to implement this convention is also to address domestic violence and violence in all the sectors of society, because the women are suffering even more disproportionately among the workforce.
Now, the unions have rightly called for, all the workplaces to be repurposed to accommodate and deal with this coronavirus crisis. And we've seen countries reporting a surge in more people joining the union. But the big question, Valter, is why now? I mean, why now? Where were the unions? And is there perhaps a danger of people assuming that unions are being opportunistic here? They're using a crisis to further their agendas.
I would say that there are a number of countries in which workers have a perception that they needed more and more to be united in this moment, to protect the health and safety immediately, to protect their jobs and income at the long term. And the unions are the ones that make this job. So not only protesting among society at large, demanding for government to implement health and safety measures, to implement social protection, to protect jobs and income of the workers, stimulus package to recover of the industry. We worked a lot in a number of countries and with a number of companies to repurpose and reconvert their facilities to produce these masks, PPEs, ventilators. A lot of companies work to cope to this effort to help the care and the health industry front lines. And we are also now campaigning along with the other global unions for universal access to the vaccines. And in that sense, we support the proposal of the government of South Africa and India for a temporary waiver on the intellectual property of vaccines so that we can guarantee a universal access. We could add hundreds of new facilities around the world to produce vaccines if it wasn't for intellectual property barriers that we should raise at this time, because we cannot left profits before people.
Maybe if I could rephrase the question there, Mr. Sanches, that the labor movement, including unions, including employers, including certain right-wing governments, am I correct then to suggest that all these forces I've just mentioned are using coronavirus to push through and implement certain changes that they wouldn't have otherwise implemented under normal circumstances?
I think that the world is changing, and the pandemic made all the legal actors to intervene in the process, because we're in this together. So we have to work to, and the basic role of the unions is to fight to defend their affiliates, so their members. And in that moment is where workers need the unions the most to protect the health, safety, the jobs and income of the members. And and in that sense, companies are fast-tracking restructuring, increasing redundancies. So unions are there to negotiate, to fight for the jobs, to fight for the income. And in that sense, also the transformation that is going through technologically, digitalization of the working process, workers need the unions to negotiate this process for a just transition.
This virus, Mr. Sanches, has exposed that we are all biologically susceptible to this particular, disease. The rich, the poor, the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, and the peasants as well. So, this is not a blame game. It's not an exercise of pointing fingers at each other. We all need to work together to find a lasting solution to this. So, to get a sense that there is, a political will from the governments to address this particular, this particular pandemic.
Well, I would say that some governments are working in the right direction to implement social protection schemes to preserve the health and safety so that people can be in confinement and preserve their income, preserve their jobs. But, like I said, we're not like if the virus affects everyone, we can say we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm. But most of the people are just trying to swim in the sea, while somebody will have dry land to stay dry. So we see a lot of companies that make retrenchments of workers and preserve payments to their shareholders. So this is not a joint forces to address the issue. So we see some governments doing the right thing, investing in social protection, but some of them are just taking also advantage to take more power and to challenge democracy. You were just referring to Myanmar. We're fighting a lot, mobilize international solidarity to our sisters and brothers in Myanmar as well.
So if you were given an opportunity to address governments and employers, what is it that you would tell them? What is it, or rather, what policies would you suggest that they sort of change to adapt to the so-called new normal?
Well, I would say first, implement welfare tax and gig economy tax. So for the ones that profit from the pandemic to pay more to contribute to society. And then put in place a stimulus package in priority sectors of society, the care and the health industry, infrastructure, for example, to implement 5G internet and universal access to internet because the digital divide was also exposed. Everything that has to do to a green recovery, everything that green jobs that can be generated, and also retention of industrial tissue and reconversion of of industries so that they can supply to the care and the health industry. That would be my message.
Valter Sanches, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.